Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. I hope you're all doing well and happy Friday. So today I'm back with another solved true crime case. The case I'm covering today is fairly recent. It took place in 2016. I didn't hear about it originally when it happened, but I have come to learn about it in the last year or so. And it's really shocking, really disturbing, and I think it's really important to discuss what happened to this individual, especially because cases like this are extremely rare. You'll see for why in a moment, but these sort of cases are extremely rare, so we tend not to think it could happen. But I think that just enforces the idea that we should always be very careful and very aware that people like the individual in this case and what they did to the victim exist, and they're all around us in our neighbourhoods, in our circles, and just I'll never be too careful basically. So today I'm going to be discussing the murder of 15-year-old Paige Doherty. So Paige Doherty was born on the 18th of April 2000 in Clydesbank, which is in Scotland, and she was born to a tiny community called White Crook. So it was a very tight-knit community. Everyone knew each other and was familiar with each other. She was born to her mother Pamela and her stepfather, and she was the eldest of 3 siblings. All of her siblings were under the age of 10, so Pamela definitely had her hands full. Paige's family was extremely loving. So Pamela was actually quite a young mum. So back in 2016 when the case takes place, Pamela was about 33 years old and Paige was 15. So obviously not a huge age gap between them. So I think that they were very close because they were close in age. Paige was described as a typical 2000s baby, always on her phone, always on social media, taking pictures, always wanting to get her picture taken and just communicating to people on various social media sites. Paige was an absolutely tiny girl. She was 4'8". I don't think I've ever heard or seen anyone that height. I know she was only 15, but still that is a very small stand that she had. She was really loved by her friends and she had a great circle of people around her. She was also really into makeup, fashion, and particularly hair. And even though she was 15, she actually had a Saturday job that she'd go to every week in Clydesbank. It was in the local area where she lived, and she would work a Saturday doing hair and working in the salon and just getting that experience, which I thought was quite unusual for a 15-year-old to want to give up their Saturday, but it just shows how passionate she was, and she really did want a career in hairdressing. She also had a boyfriend at the time named Dylan, and she had lots of close friends around her. So overall she had a pretty good life, and she was a happy 15-year-old just going about her life and looking forward to growing up. So the case begins on March 19th, 2016, which was a Saturday. So the previous night, Paige had stayed at her best friend Lauren's house, and the next morning, obviously, she had to go to work at the hairdressers for her Saturday job. So she woke up, got ready, and left Lauren's house just before 8 a.m. So she would have to walk into town, which was about 5 to 10 minutes, and then she would get a bus to her work, which was not far either. So she made her way to this town, and what she normally did was stopped off and got a breakfast roll or a drink at this parade of shops. So a few hours later, Lauren was texting Paige, as you do when you're best friends, and also Dylan, Paige's boyfriend, was texting her just to say, hey, you alright, haven't heard from you today, because Paige hadn't actually texted her boyfriend saying good morning, probably because she was in a rush, but Lauren also texted her and Paige wasn't responding. So it got to a few hours later and both of them started to get a bit concerned because they hadn't heard from Paige. Dylan actually got so worried that he decided to ring Paige's work. So he took that upon himself to call the salon and ask if Paige was there, because she hadn't texted him all day and he was probably worrying that something was wrong with her, or she was annoyed with him or something. But to his surprise, when he rang the salon, Paige's manager answered and said that she hadn't actually turned up to work that day. So alarm bells started going for Dylan, and obviously he told Lauren, and they just became increasingly suspicious because Paige had left Lauren's that morning to go to work. And then Paige's manager said that she did try and call Paige and text her, but she didn't answer. But what I find really unusual is that I didn't see anywhere, maybe she did, but I didn't see anywhere that she had attempted to contact Pamela to ask where Paige was or why Paige wasn't at work, because you'd think she'd have that sort of responsibility being her manager, because Paige was a minor and surely she should have contacted her next of kin if she didn't show up. But anyway, so then Dylan decided to call Pamela and say, Paige isn't at work, is she with you, is she at home? And Pamela said no, she's not here either. She wasn't originally really concerned. I think at the time, because she had 3 young kids under the age of 10 that she was looking after, so she had her hands full, and obviously Paige was 15 and she did trust Paige and she was responsible. So I don't think it initially like set in the fact that Paige hadn't turned up at work, but she just basically said, oh, I'm sure she's fine, she's probably out with friends, or she's forgot her charger and that's why she's not texting you back. But at the back of her mind, I think she was a bit shocked, because Paige wasn't one to not turn up to work. But again, you know, 15-year-olds are unpredictable. So she didn't originally panic, but obviously that all soon changed. But obviously all Paige's friends and her boyfriend were adamant that this was out of character and that Paige wouldn't just go the whole day without talking to anyone. Time was getting on and it got to about 6 p.m. and that's when Pamela and Andy, her stepfather, Paige's stepfather, decided that they needed to call the police, because this was not like Paige to not text her mum all day or get home. She was meant to get home at 6 p.m. and she wasn't there, so that's when the panic, I think, really set in for Pamela. Police quickly took action and turned up at their house, and of course the first sort of questions they ask is it likely that Paige ran away? You know, it's unfortunate, but a lot of young kids do just run away and then come back within the next few days, but of course not always. But that is why the police obviously look at this inquiry first. But everyone was absolutely adamant that there's no way Paige would have ran away. She had no reason to, and she was at her friend's the night before, so how would she have run away by just staying at her friend's? She wouldn't have made it that difficult for herself. And also she loved her job and she was happy, so police quickly ruled this out based on what Paige's friends and family said. But it's really sad, because I watched an interview with Pamela and she said that as the night got on that Saturday, when it went into like the evening time, she kind of just knew that something was really wrong, and she had her motherly instincts kick in, and she just kind of knew that it wasn't going to be good news for Paige. So the next day, on Sunday the 20th of March, the police decided to basically trace Paige's steps. So from where she lived to where Lauren's house is, they kind of scoped the area that Paige would have gone to get her bus to work. And one of the main areas that they checked, as I said at the beginning, was this parade of 5 shops. So this was just near the bus stop that Paige would get when she went to work. So there was a parade of 5 shops that she regularly visited, as I said, to get like a breakfast roll or a drink. There was a newsagent's, a deli and a hairdresser's and a few other shops. So they went there first and spoke to all of the shop owners. The first shop owner was a man called Ashi Ahmed, and he was really helpful. He actually said to police that he did see Paige that Saturday morning, but she didn't go into his shop. She walked past the door and he kind of just like waved, and she waved back, and then that's it. But she didn't go into his shop that day. She looked like she was going into one of the other shops or just walking past. They then interviewed John Leatham, who worked next door in a shop called Delicious Deli, that obviously was a deli that sold sandwiches, and he said that he hadn't seen Paige either. So they basically asked everyone and no one else had seen her. So what they did is they asked all of the shop owners if they would be prepared to give over their CCTV. However, only 1 of 5 shops actually had outdoor CCTV. The rest was inside. So Ashi Ahmed, the newsagent owner, was the one that had the outside CCTV. So he more than happily gave over that CCTV. And what that had was basically a 12-hour rolling period. But they only needed the 3 hours from sort of around 8 a.m. to about 11 a.m. on Saturday to see what direction Paige went to after she waved at Ashi Ahmed. So this was going to be really helpful, because they could basically see what direction Paige went into after she's picked up on CCTV. So what they basically did is, while that was being processed, is they went to Paige's house and basically questioned Pamela, Andy, her stepdad, and all of the family, and they searched the house because, you know, unfortunately 9 times out of 10 when someone does go missing and foul play is involved, it is normally a close family member or close family friend. So of course they had to rule out the main people in her life first. But of course they didn't find anything, and Pamela was very cooperative and obviously just trying to hold it all together after her daughter has gone missing. So they started doing that, but as they were going through everything, the next day on Monday the 21st, they actually received a call from the police department, and it was the news that no one wanted. This call came in about 6 a.m. in the morning, and basically a local dog walker was out walking his dog, and he stumbled across a pair of legs that was sticking out from one of the bushes, and of course he immediately worried that it was a body, so he called the police. Then they later identified the body to be a young woman. The forensics teams came to the park and basically took the body, and they said it was some of the worst injuries they had ever seen. This young woman had literally stab wounds all over her. She had around 61 stab wounds in her head, neck and arms, and there was almost a huge chunk of her neck missing. There were also a further 85 slashes and marks and bruises across her body, some defence wounds and some other objects being used other than the knife that basically stabs the woman. So it was a really shocking scene. When Pamela found out, she did have that small bit of hope, because the police described this body as a young woman around the age of 20, and she was basically like, well, my Paige is tiny, she's 4'8", she's 15 years old, so hopefully this isn't her. At the time there were a few other missing girls in the area. There was 2 brunettes that were missing, including Paige, and then a blonde lady, so there was sort of a 1 in 3 chance that this was going to be Paige. However, later that night, one of the other girls actually turned up, and it was the blonde girl. So when the police returned back to Pamela's house to ask her to come and identify the body out of the 2 missing brown-haired girls, she said, well, it's obviously Paige, because you wouldn't be on my doorstep if it was the blonde girl. So she kind of just knew then, and unfortunately the next day she did confirm that the body was in fact her 15-year-old daughter, Paige Doherty. So this turned from a disappearance to now a homicide investigation, and Paige had sustained some awful injuries. One thing that the forensic team picked up on quite quickly was that there was no blood underneath Paige's body or surrounding her body on the grass, and due to it being such a brutal attack, there would be blood there. So this basically suggested that Paige had been murdered at another location and then her body was dumped here. So they had at least that to go on. When the CCTV footage was ready to be viewed, what they basically did is they sat through it for the 3 hours and watched, and they did in fact see Paige walk past Ashi Ahmed's shop. But then it looked like she went to the next shop instead, which was the Delicious Deli owned by John Leatham, and you can actually see Paige entering that shop. But at first, John said that he hadn't seen Paige that day. They carried on watching, waiting for Paige to walk out of the deli to go and get her bus, but the time went on and on and on, and Paige never actually left the deli. And 10 minutes after she walked in, the shutters of the deli actually closed. As they kept watching the CCTV, waiting for Paige to emerge, they still didn't see her. Instead, they saw John Leatham coming out of his shop, running out of his shop into Ashi Ahmed's newsagents, where he purchased bin bags, bleach and antibacterial wipes. He's then seen taking a large item out from his shop and putting it in the back of his car. He then goes back in, reopens the shutters and continues serving customers for the rest of the day. So at this point, police are baffled because Paige was never seen leaving the deli. So that must mean that she was still in there. Ashi Ahmed then reconfirmed that he did remember John going into his shop and buying these products, and he also recalled later on in the day he saw John outside doing something and he had a bit of blood on his nose, and Ashi Ahmed and one of the ladies who works in the hairdressers next to the deli said to him, "Are you okay? You've got blood on your nose." And he basically said, "Yeah, I just had a nosebleed," and then hurried back inside. And now it's all kind of piecing together for the police for what actually could have happened. So John Leatham was taken in for questioning. At this point, there was a lot of questions that the police had to ask him. Firstly, why did he lie? He said he didn't see Paige that day. So when he was brought in for questioning, he did confirm that Paige actually did come in and she did buy a roll. But, you know, he serves so many people that he couldn't possibly remember who comes in and all that. So he then confirmed that he did see Paige, but then says that she left and then went to get her bus to work. But obviously she didn't. After this point, however, he decided to answer no comment to all of the questions. The forensics went into John's business, Delicious Deli, and searched to see if there was any evidence or any blood, but it looked really clean and there wasn't anything noticeably wrong. However, when they kept looking, they actually found blood splatters on the floorboard of his deli in the back of his office, so away from the kitchen but in his office. So at this point they have pretty much enough evidence to basically bring him in and charge him with the murder of Paige Doherty. But the thing is, he wasn't speaking, so at this point no one knows how he could do such a thing. So let's talk about John Leatham. So John Leatham was a 31-year-old business owner. He was a husband and also a father of two, and he was a very respected and likeable member of the community. He opened his deli back in 2013 and always had a smile on his face. People used to go in and buy stuff off him, and people in the community were shocked to see that this man had been charged in connection with Paige's murder, because it's just the last sort of person you would suspect. People even thought that police had got the wrong man, like there was no way that this seemingly nice business owner in the community could have done something like this. So he was going to be charged with the murder of Paige, but at this point they didn't have a confession, they didn't have him admitting to anything, but they had pretty substantial evidence, so it was enough for them. 6 months later, in September of 2016, he appeared at a private court hearing where he was going to be sentenced, and at this point it'd been 6 months with Pamela not knowing exactly what happened to her daughter. Obviously she knew by the injuries, but she didn't know why. She didn't know what this man had to say for himself. Not that there's anything he could have said, but you know, he didn't even elaborate on what happened. So she had to go 6 months waiting for this court date to get his sentence, and to everyone's surprise he actually pleaded guilty. So my theory on why he did this is that in most cases, if you do plead guilty to murder, then you are given a slightly lesser sentence because it's an acknowledgement of guilt and shows remorse. So if you just say you're not guilty, then it's kind of saying like you don't give a shit and, you know, you don't think you're in the wrong. So they took this as an acknowledgement of his guilt, and then he finally started talking. So this is going to be John's account of what happened that day and why Paige was murdered. So back to that day on the Saturday the 19th of March 2016, Paige walks into John Leatham's deli at about 8:20 a.m. She asked him to make her a breakfast roll, so he begins preparing it, and then apparently they just get chatting about work and jobs, and apparently she says that she actually wanted a job in his deli. So he is like, okay, great, come to my office in the back, we're going to fill out an application and then we can kind of contact you and go from there about setting up an interview. So as Paige is writing out her details, she's putting her date of birth, which obviously she's 15. So when he sees 2000, he's like, whoa. He's like, I'm really sorry, but I didn't realise you were 15, so I'm not going to be able to offer you a job, so let's just forget about this. He then said that Paige stood up and was aggressive and angry with him and threatened that if she didn't give her the job, that she would then report him to the police and to her mum and say that he basically sexually assaulted her. And at this moment he stood up, they started arguing, and he basically grabbed a knife from the desk behind him and started stabbing Paige. Which is obviously a load of shit. Obviously, he just murdered her because he's sick in the head and he just can't admit that. But he decided to use this bullshit excuse that she blackmailed him and that it sent him... I don't even know what even saying that, even if that did happen, how is that just goes from that to I'm gonna murder this child? I don't understand. Like, yeah, even if that did happen, you'd get annoyed, you'd be like, oh my god, like you'd panic because, you know, this is a 15-year-old that's blackmailing you. But I still don't think most people would go to the extremes of taking a knife and stabbing someone because of it. But obviously this is not what happened. Pamela vouches for Paige that Paige didn't even want another job. She had a job in the hairdressers that she loved. Why would she want to out doing hair, which is like a career that she wanted, to making sandwiches? You know, it doesn't really make any sense. And the worst part about this is that after he murdered Paige, he obviously ran and got the bleach and the bin bags and the antibac wipes. whatever he did, he put her body in a bin bag and put it in the car, and then he carried on working for the rest of the day, serving customers while a lifeless body of a teenager was in his car. Like, just what the fuck. So what happened after that is, at the end of his shift, he basically drove home, and allegedly he kept Paige's body in the shed in his garden, and then the next day he took his young family out for a day out somewhere, and then when he got back, or the next morning on the Monday the 21st, he dumped Paige's body in the woods, where it was found later at 6 a.m. by the dog walker. He was sentenced to 27 years in prison, and the judge is so passionate about the sentence. There's a video on YouTube that you can go and watch where she basically reads out a speech saying, "You did this to a defenceless child. I believe you deserve the maximum sentence," which is around 27 years. So it was a result for the family, but equally it's not going to bring their little girl back. Shortly after, he had the nerve to appeal his sentence, saying that it was excessive, and he then got reduced to 23 years, which I just couldn't believe. I think the excessive part was you murdering a 15-year-old child for your own sexual or gratification. As I said in the beginning, this case, this sort of thing is so rare. It's very, very rare to be murdered by a stranger. Of course it happens, don't get me wrong. We hear about it in the news, but that's because it's so rare. You know, the things that happen day to day, like domestic abuse, domestic violence, you know, you don't really hear about all of the cases because there's so many, if you get me. So this is so rare to just be murdered, like, by a stranger. It doesn't look like it was planned. Well, it can't have been planned. He couldn't have known Paige had gone in that day. So what made this man tick, this seemingly happy, you know, father of two, what makes someone just tick like that? John Leatham didn't have any history of mental illness or any prior convictions. He didn't even have an outstanding parking ticket on his record. So what makes someone go from not even having that to full-blown murder of a child? The motive is still unclear. I don't think many people know. No one will ever really know what the motive was. However, there are, of course, some theories. The first theory is that he had an obsession with Paige, and that, you know, he just liked the look of her and he had his own sick sexual fantasies about her. So when she got into the deli, I think it's pretty obvious that he propositioned her and wanted to have sex with her. Well, yeah, and she basically turned him down, as she would, and I think that's why he got violent and then ended up killing her. Because it also suggests a crime of passion to me, and what I mean by that is a crime of passion is normally when you murder someone, there's certain ways to do it. If you shoot someone from afar, that's not a crime of passion, that's a quick blow to get them out, whereas stabbing someone that many times is more of a crime of passion, because there's got to be some emotion behind it, emotional connection behind it. So the fact that he stabbed her over sort of 80 times is shocking. She would have been dead within the first few stab wounds, but he kept going, which suggests that there was some sort of connection there on his side. Something that I found when I was researching him that I found really, really interesting is that he actually had a twin brother called George Latham, and he was actually a convicted sex offender on the sex offenders list for raping a woman back in 2004. And this spoke volumes to me. So I'm not for 1 minute saying that if you're a twin and your twin is a predator or a murderer, that's going to make you a murderer or a predator. Not at all. But there is quite a high increase that this will be the case. So I checked this out online. I think it's something like, if one twin has schizophrenia, for example, the other twin has a 40 to 70% chance of also getting that, but it's not obviously all the time. So I found that really interesting. So his brother was obviously serving time for the crime he did, and then John obviously just randomly murdered a young woman, so I feel like there's definitely a connection there. But then some people think it was just a pure moment of insanity and a built up rage that he had inside him. Other people think that it could have been anyone that was murdered that day, and it was just a case of Paige being in the wrong place at the wrong time. Their family is so strong. Pamela has done so many interviews online, which I admire her. I respect her so much for being able to talk about this. and to have to raise 3 younger children as well. I just cannot imagine the strength it takes to be mourning your 15-year-old child and then looking after your 3 young children under the age of 10. It's just unbelievable. She also welcomed a baby in 2017 that she gave Paige's middle name to, so I'm glad that they're obviously doing okay, but you know, I don't think they'll ever really be okay with not having Paige around. So that's the case of Paige Doherty. Let me know what you think about this, if you've heard it before, and also what you think about John Leatham, how this could have all happened. So I hope you've enjoyed this case, and I'll see you next time. Take care. Bye.